Good afternoon, everyone.
5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Margaret Graham. I'm excited to be here today for this presentation
Good afternoon, everyone.
About, oops, excuse
4,
me.
3.
About an exciting public-private partnership. And with me are our presenters today, John Zmolek and Degale Cooper. Let me give them a brief introduction. Degale is the Chief Program and Impact Officer from YouthCare. She joined YouthCare in June of 2018, but has a 30-year professional history in the nonprofit sector after working on an array of different direct clinical services, program development and implementation, international consulting on issues of child welfare, et cetera. John Zmolek is former CEO with Verity Credit Union. He managed the operations of the credit union while working closely with the board of directors, and is passionate about helping members empower their financial lives. I will now just turn it over to them, and thank you both for being here and being part of Housing Washington.
Thanks, Margaret. And let me introduce the other folks on your screen. First, right with me is Jerry Jutting, architect, co-owner of James Place Studios, and most importantly, my husband. And also we have Jessica Safley, who is the interim director of young adult housing for YouthCare. Well, we want to share the story of James Place Studio with you today. It is the story of a partnership of two small-time developers searching for an effective way of making at least a small contribution to addressing the homeless issue, and YouthCare, an established agency continually looking for more and better ways to help youth not only find housing, but move forward in reaching their life goals. Starting us off with a testimony of the impact of programs like James Place Studios is Jessica. Take it away, Jessica.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and start you off with a little bit of a personal testimony from one of our program managers in YouthCare. So Manny has lived experience. He attributes the Master Lease program very similar to what we have at James Place Studios as helping him not only, in his words, to stabilize and survive, but to truly thrive. Manny says that he wouldn't be here without a program like this. And that's why he's come back to do this work and has been a phenomenal leader in our organization because he understands the impact that it has. So this is Manny in his own words.
Housing is a very important part of growth and healing. I believe that a lot of these youth, they come from a background of not knowing where they're gonna eat or where they're gonna sleep or how they're gonna live. So an opportunity to have housing for these youth, to give them a chance to heal is so crucial to this new environment and this new world for these youth. Without housing, it's just another scenario in which these youth just don't have a consistent thing going for them. That's why I do believe in this housing opportunity for these youth. I think that it helps them to really focus on other things and other aspects in their lives that they really can't focus on when all they can think about is where they're gonna sleep or where they're gonna be, living. So I do think it's really important to have housing for a lot of these youth. Awesome. That's it.
Thanks, Jessica. And we'll hear more from Jessica and Degale later regarding the program. But next we'll hear from Jerry, who will share our story of how James Place Studios came to be.
All right. Hi, everybody. I really like talking about James Place Studios, so I'm glad to have this time to talk to you all. I guess the first question a lot of people ask is, why did we decide to do this? And John and I have family members, including our two sons, who at times have experienced some combination of homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. We've learned this requires a community response. An individual family can't provide by themselves the variety and flexibility of support often needed by our loved ones who are living with these issues. We asked ourselves, what could we do to provide the kind of housing our own kids need? We asked as an architect, a banker, and with experience in small scale real estate development, we figured we have some skills to do something about this. Jessica, could you put on the next slide, please? This story kind of begins in Germany. One of our sons was in the army and he was stationed in Germany in 2010. He married a German woman and we started making frequent visits there. They lived in privately owned apartment buildings and they and some of their neighbors received government assistance similar to our Section 8 housing, our Section 8 vouchers. Most of these buildings were 3 or 4 story walk-ups and they had 6 to 8 units. This slide shows one example. And next slide, please. Here's another more modern example. These buildings were often owned by individual local investors. Could you switch to the next slide, please? We realize that Germany is full of these buildings. Here's a view of the town where our family lives, and the buildings in the foreground and the background are all small multifamily buildings. And we asked ourselves, why can't we do something like this here in Seattle? So we decided to give it a try. And I'd also like to acknowledge here that we often felt unsure of what we were doing, and our friends and fellow church members were a constant source of support and encouragement. We didn't own a multifamily building, but we did have a townhouse in North Seattle, which we used as a rental. So this is a picture of that townhouse. This first project in 2015 was working with the Landlord Liaison Project. It's a program that at that time was run by King County. The LLP connected tenants with housing owners and provided some counseling and financial support for tenants, and also some financial protection for owners. John and I had this townhouse in North Seattle. And if you could go back, Jessica, I'm just going to stick with that one for a minute. With the help of our property manager, this townhouse was rented out to an LLP client, a single woman and her 5-year-old son. Unfortunately, this arrangement didn't last very long. The tenant stopped paying rent, which led to her eviction after 10 months. This was a difficult situation for her and for our property manager and for us. She had received some financial counseling, some financial assistance, and we had received some financial support from the LLP, but we also had some financial losses. Rather than re-rent this townhouse through the LLP, we decided to sell it and use the money for our second project, which is this next slide. This house in the middle of this slide, the yellow house with the blue gables, was a house that we bought in Bremerton in 2016. The social service agency that we worked with was just starting a housing program for homeless women vets. This house was in a convenient downtown location close to services. We had the cooperation and support of neighbors. The upper 2 floors had 4 bedrooms and a separate lower unit on the lower level had 1 bedroom. And their plan was to have 6 to 8 women living upstairs and a manager in the lower unit. This was a new program for the agency and they weren't very well organized. The income from the tenants was not regular and we often made financial concessions and forgave unpaid rent. After 3 years, the neighbors reported increasing turnover and some disturbances at the house and we decided not to renew the lease. From this project, we learned important lessons about maintaining good neighborhood relations and about working with a social service agency that has experience and is well organized. So that led us to YouthCare, and this slide shows the property as we bought it on Aurora Avenue North. And we went to YouthCare. We started talking with YouthCare because one of our sons had received services from them, and we were impressed by their outreach, organization, and commitment. So we worked with YouthCare to develop a building that served the need for housing their clients who are exiting their program and ready for the experience of independent living. We spent the first year looking for an appropriate site in a central location. Several were considered before we bought this property on Aurora Avenue in Fremont. It has great access to public transportation, downtown, schools, and services. It's a few blocks from our house and was listed for sale by owner. During design and construction, we had frequent conversations with YouthCare. And next slide, please, Jessica. And that's the completed building. So James Place Studios has 13 studio apartments and 2 live-work units on Aurora Avenue. Next slide, please. Here are the floor plans. Each upper floor has 4 studio apartments. The first floor has 2 live-work units facing Aurora Avenue. That's the lower plan on this slide. On the alley side, there's an accessible studio apartment and building services. There's an on-site laundry room. Apartments are accessible through a secure courtyard with an accessible stair, that's shown in the schematic design, an exterior stair. 1 live-work unit provides housing for the on-site manager. The other is used for office and community space. The live-work units have about 450 square feet, and the studio apartments have about 290 square feet. In this design model, in the early schematic design stage, we met with engineers to help identify savings points for mechanical, electrical, and sprinkler systems. We decided not to have an elevator, similar to the German apartments. We also decided to keep the total square footage below 5,000 square feet to avoid design review and its associated costs and permitting delays. Could we see the next slide now, Jessica? Here are some interior views of the studios. They're designed with durable materials. Next one. Due to the location on Aurora Avenue, they have special sound reduction class. All the apartments have cross ventilation and air conditioning. And the next slide, please. They feature extra insulation, low water toilets, and all electric construction. And the next slide. All of the studios have private outdoor space, either a deck or a patio, and many of them have great views. So that's a brief introduction to the building, and now I'll turn it back to John.
Well, thank you, Jerry. And now we're going to hear from Jessica about the program and services YouthCare provides at James Place Studios.
Wonderful, thank you. So YouthCare really takes a housing first approach. We know that housing is foundational in helping a person stabilize. It's really hard to even plan for the future when the immediate is so uncertain. So James Place Studios gives people a home, and that's the first step. From here, we meet young people where they are, and we help them to develop really a holistic approach, all domains that they're going to need in order to be successful long-term. We see our housing programs as a launching pad. We want them to come in. We're working on life skills development. We're working on building healthy relationships, setting boundaries, overcoming, a lot of our young people are coming from some pretty significant traumatic events. And so how do we help them? How do we wrap around, support them, build the skills? So not only are they successful for the 1 year that they're at James Place, but 2, 3, 10 years down the line, we want to know that the young person has used this opportunity to really develop themselves. So when we were given this wonderful opportunity of James Place Studios in particular, we really wanted to see, well, what is it that we could do to really help our young people? And so we looked for opportunity here to see this as a place to give our young people the opportunity to practice financial management. So really balancing that day-to-day responsibility. A lot of our young people are coming from, not having ever had to budget before or not having been taught those skills. So we really foster financial stewardship when working with our young people. They pay what we call program fees, which is rent, but up to 40% of their income, but never more than $800 per month. And a lot of the reason for this is we want them to get in that habit and work with our team on building that budget, understanding what comes into living independently. How do we plan for that? And then knowing that we want this to be a launching place, like I had mentioned, that we want them to stabilize long term. Everything that they pay in those program fees comes back to them when they leave, so that they can then use that as a down payment for their next place, which is really amazing about a master lease setup like this, that we have that opportunity to support our young people in a way that a lot of other programs just aren't able to do. So that I see as a real benefit. Another way that really supports our young people is, when we were sitting in the beginning of the pandemic, that really changed the trajectory for so many of our people coming in. Like, they lost their jobs and they would come and talk to us and say, I don't know how to pay my rent this month. So we have the ability to be a little bit more flexible with our young people to say, well, if you can't pay rent this month, how can we build that? How can we support you? And how can you support the community? And so young people would then support by helping to take out the trash, leading life skills workshops for their peers, kind of that peer-to-peer learning opportunity in our community groups, and just really looking for ways to give back so that they were continuing to build that conversation with us, and seeing again that we're a place where, we're giving them that opportunity to build a rental history. Because it's so hard when you have a high debt to income ratio, you don't have rental history to go out and get your first apartment. So everything that we do here is to really stabilize, foster those skills so that they can move on and be able to do those things. So that is probably one of the biggest benefits. I would also say, now that they are part of James Place Studios, they're part of the YouthCare umbrella. So our young people can access our workforce development team, which is working on internships. We've got an internship recently with Kraken in Seattle, which we're so excited about. And how do we really use this space as a way to say, great, we're going to help you get these internships. We're going to practice resume building, interviewing skills, connect you in every way so that you're not just dependent on a youth care program, but you are building those skills out into the community so you can go and make Seattle your home long term. And it's all part of a bigger umbrella in that way. So that's James Place Studio in a nutshell. I'll send it back to you both.
All right, thanks, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
This next section, we're going to talk about sort of putting it all together, the business and financial considerations of the partnership. As Jerry said, what motivated us was not solely financial gain, but rather, how could we use our skills and resources to help alleviate homelessness, specifically for youth? However, we were also interested in perhaps creating a model that could be replicated throughout Seattle, throughout Washington, throughout the US. We feel that solving the homelessness issue will take a whole bucket full of approaches, large scale as well as small scale. If this was going to be one of those approaches, it had to be financially viable, both for youth care as well as for us. Next slide. One of the first quirks of this process was matching development cycles with the social service funding cycle. Between permitting as well as labor shortages, zoning issues, predicting when the building would be ready for occupancy was dicey, more of an art rather than a science. And on youth care side, in order to apply for grant money, they need to have a fairly certain occupation date, as well as it can be difficult for a nonprofit to obtain grant money for a project not expected to launch for a long period of time. Granting sources want immediate results often. Although we coordinated with youth care from site selection on, we only seriously began lease negotiations when we thought we both could do it, which was about 6 months before building completion. Even then, it was only 2 months prior to building completion that youth care had the funding in hand to move forward. So as developers, we had to be ready to pivot to leasing on the open market until the very end of the development. Clearly, there had to be a strong sense of trust on both sides to make this happen. And this, despite the uncertainty of the process on both sides, we both kept moving forward. And the next slide. So we have a master lease. So it's interesting, the youth care has a master lease with the youth, and we have a master lease with youth care. This is similar to a triple net lease. YouthCare covers utilities, has full use of and control of the building. They also pay for general maintenance and taxes, whereas we as developer are responsible for the building and the infrastructure. The YouthCare lease is 5 years, which provides both them and us with some stability. However, YouthCare's financing of the project is not long-term. If they could not, if they could not obtain funding, their ability to break the lease is fairly generous. I mean, this is clearly a risk to us as developers, but once again, the ability to switch to a market rate offering minimizes that risk for us. And the master lease has considerable advantages to a developer versus a typical, market rate rental property. For one, there are no vacancy costs, which is often calculated at 5 to 10% of rental income. In addition, they do the property management, so we don't have those costs, which also is about, anywhere from 6 to 10% of rental income, depending on how many units you may have overall. And so the rate goes up and down from property management companies. For us, it's about 7%. And finally, because they have a master lease of this property, YouthCare as a nonprofit qualifies for a property tax exemption. In 2020, this was about 25% of the rents collected. So all in all, there is approximately a 35 to 40% cut in annual expenses compared to renting a market rate rental, which is considerable. Because of this, we were able to offer YouthCare a considerable discount to the market rate, probably around 20%, as well as we locked in a fixed rate, a lease rate for 5 years, which also provided YouthCare some stability in knowing what their expenses would be going forward. So as a developer, given the cut in operating expenses, we figure our ROI was approximately 7.25 in 2020. Now, in the world of development, that may be on the low side. As I'm not an expert in this, but as I poke around the internet, double-digit return expectations seem to be the norm, with 15% most commonly mentioned. However, I would propose that a lower rate of return of investment would still be attractive to developers, as the more variable costs of having a rental property, such as vacancies, as well as the cost of turnover, as well as increasing property tax rates, do not fall to the owner under a master lease arrangement. And so our income stream is more stable. Next slide. And of course, as I said, it has to have advantages to YouthCare. I mean, the biggest one really is they were handed a program-ready facility with no development or purchasing costs and minimal fundraising. There was no capital campaign to move into this building. And full disclosure, I have since joined the YouthCare board, and we're in the middle of a huge fundraising campaign for a new property. So I'm getting a sense of how much time and effort goes into that. So that's a huge gain for YouthCare. They want to be doing in the business of helping youth, not necessarily in the business of raising money. The only fundraising the organization did do was for furnishing the studios. This drive was oversubscribed in a matter of days via an online ask. But I'm going to stop talking about the advantages to YouthCare and turn it over to Degale.
Thanks, John. So John mentioned a lot of the benefits to not only the developer, but also to YouthCare. And, one thing about YouthCare is that, we serve young people in this supportive housing model that are ages 18 to 24. And for a lot of those young people, the unpredictability of stable, secure housing is enough that it creates many other challenges in their life. But here, we are able to work with that young person, kind of like Jessica said before, to ensure that no matter what crisis situation may arise, that young person is able to maintain their housing. So for instance, if a young person, has to stay in the hospital for a while, instead of having the danger of losing their housing, we're able to maintain that unit because the organization is able to access rental assistance funds to help clients stay in their units. I would say the biggest opportunity for a service organization like YouthCare in collaborating in this master leasing project is that really it allows us to bring dignified housing options online faster for young people who need these services. And by working within the existing housing market, master leasing allows a service organization like YouthCare to not only bring that housing online faster, but also it allows us to focus our attention to the youth because we're not doing what John said, which is spending all of our time doing capital campaigns, trying to do the fundraising for, making sure that we have ongoing rent for the year to ensure that we can show success to the community. And so when we're doing these types of collaborative projects together for a service organization, one of the other biggest benefits is that our hope is that as landlords get to hear about this type of collaboration and the successes that we've had in a model like this, that more landlords would be willing to do this type of work with service organizations. And so when we look at Seattle, especially King County area, the numbers of young people that are without housing, and that's just our young adult population. We also have our older adult population that are also experiencing homelessness. But that number is growing in our community. When developers are able to bring this type of housing to the entire community, what they're saying to an organization like us is that we believe that everyone should be housed. We believe that individuals should have dignified housing. We also believe that we can join in partnership with each other to end homelessness in our community. And this is a great way. This is a great partnership and opportunity for everyone. When young people are afforded the chance to live in some place like James Place Studios, they too can also begin to start that process of getting connected to work, education, the other behavioral and mental health resources that they need, because their housing is guaranteed. They don't have to worry about losing that. And so I would just like to say, just in summary to all of this, is that master leasing is an essential resource for service organizations like us. Master leasing is an essential way out of our homelessness problem in our community. And the more that we do that in our community, we're going to be able to end homelessness altogether. So I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Degale. Well said. And as she said, we think this model can be a very effective tool to alleviate the homeless issue. I mean, one is finding the right match. And one of the reasons we're here today is to start talking about it so that hopefully some developers will say, why didn't I think about that? And start looking for a nonprofit to work with, as well as nonprofits, maybe putting the word out as like, we'd be interested in this. I don't think we talked about the financial advantages to both partners. We feel like it gives a steady and decent return for our investment and our risk, and as well as Degale and I both said, it helps nonprofits stay out of the development business, to reduce the amount of fundraising they have to do and move on to actually providing services. I just want to end just saying that Jerry and I are very happy with this. It was a long journey, as Jerry said, from trying one thing and then another, and then coming this. But we're just really happy that all of us have come together and are really creating a place that is changing lives. But once again, instead of having, I think it's appropriate to end with the words of the youth themselves. So Jessica.
Yeah, I can read these out. So I just asked a couple of our young people, what has it been like living at James Place, or what does this mean to you, this opportunity? And one resident, Maya, told me, staying at James Place was a major stepping stone in my life. My stay at James Place Studios prepared me for renting in the real world and gave me everything I'd expect out of renting experience, and prepared me for residential living completely independently. And then another RW tells us, if it wasn't for James Place, I wouldn't have been able to get the stability I needed to finally get out of debt and get my life together. And both of these residents have moved on and are living independently in their own apartments.
Thank you. It's
Mhm.
it's one of the things that Jerry and I starve for, is having done this. It's like, can we get real stories? So thank you, Jessica. With that, Margaret, I think we're ready to come back on the screen and take any questions there might be.
Great, thank you. There is one question in the chat right now about the building of James Place. How were you able to build without an elevator, without running afoul of ADA or other accessibility requirements?
There was, because of the number of units, we were only required to provide one accessible unit. And there's a provision in the code that in a building without an elevator, that the units above the first floor don't have to be type B units, which would normally be required. So that's how we did it. We knew that in order to make this work, we'd have to avoid certain expenses. That's why we worked with the engineers very carefully to reduce expenses on mechanical systems. And also why we decided not to have an elevator. It took a lot of code research on my part and consulting with others to figure out how we could do that and still be code conforming.
And our daughter-in-law and son in Germany always tended to live on the top floor of these units. And so we knew, we had experience that you can live on, and walk up 3 flights of stairs.
Yeah.
Without an elevator.
All right, I see another question here, and I'll just remind everybody who's watching right now, please go ahead and enter any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll get to those. The next one is from Joe. I believe that Jessica mentioned that rental payments go toward down payments for future housing. Can she elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So our workaround is, that they pay rent, but we call it program fees so that they can get that back. Generally, what we've done is we have some flexibility working with the young person to say, would you like us then to send a check to your next place of residence? And that generally would cover, first month rent. Rent actually, if they've been paying that $800 all along for a year, actually covers a sizable amount. And so it can really help them. Then they can focus on furniture and getting their utilities set up. But we've also had the opportunity where we've had a young person saying, actually, I'm pretty comfortable with my rental. It's very affordable to me, but can you send a check to my school so that I can pay some of my school fees as they were going back to school and becoming a student. And so we do have that flexibility of, so long as, they give us a release of information, we can then call, get the contact information, and then our accounting team will then take that check and send it directly in for that young person.
Interesting.
Can I just add, Margaret? I'm sorry.
Of course, yeah.
Because people might ask this question too. So then how is the service organization able to, pay the developer, the landlord, the rents? Well, that's what we're doing. We're accessing rental assistance funds that come in based on the type of young people that we're serving at James Place Studios. And then even though young people are paying the program fees, and that's why it's not called rent, program fees, we're able to access those client assistance funds to then pay the rent on the units that the young people are utilizing. And so that allows the landlord to always have income coming in for those units, so rent for those units, while the young people in the end, because we got that free government money, we do need to give that money back also, the money that young people pay to them as they exit. Now, a second generation to this kind of master leasing might be a lot of young people have about $9,600 when they exit. Wouldn't it be great to have actual houses or something permanent that developers work with an organization like ours so that they can be first-time home buyers and then never have to be really homeless again? So just a thought.
Wow, that would be amazing. That kind of reminded me of a question I had while you were describing the program about how they make that transition at the end of a year into independent living. But with that chunk of cash, that seems like a big reason for that ability.
Right.
Mhm.
There's another question about about a waiting lists. Is there a waiting list for the James Bliss Apartments, and how are the applicants considered and accepted?
Yes. So because we have 13 units, there's definitely a waiting list. So what we do when we know we have a unit coming about, generally we take from our YouthCare program. And so if we have somebody coming in and say, hey, I think I have a really good fit for James Place, we definitely get them on a list. We prioritize on who is going to utilize James Place to the best of their ability. And so we'll do a phone screening with the young person and talk to them about, what are your long-term goals? What are you moving towards? Is this something that you are ready for independent living? Because we do take a housing first approach. That does mean that sometimes our young people are coming in and, they're in the pathway towards sobriety, but they're not quite there yet, or they need a little bit more supports. And so we say what we can and cannot offer. We're very different than our transitional housing programs within YouthCare, where those are more structured, kind of like conceptually like a group home where they have a shared kitchen, a shared living space. And it is a little bit more intensive because the people coming in need that level of supervision and support. And so at James Place, it looks very different. So I very much have that conversation with whoever's referring from the get-go and that young person, so they know this is very much an independent program. We have access to some food pantry items that they can come and pick up, but ultimately we're not providing their meals. They are living independently. They're expected to pay rent and to communicate when those times when they can't. And so then I ask the young person pretty candidly, is that something that you're ready for? And sometimes they say no. And then that's when we look to refer them to one of our transitional housing programs.
Makes sense. Here's another good question. From Marty Kustra. John, I know you were always trying to be creative when you were CEO of Verity Credit Union, trying to find ways to move the needle. What have you learned both through this innovative partnership and in your work at Verity about the affordable housing challenge and how we can best address it?
Wow, that's a big question, Marty. There are several different things. One is I would say never is not trying to do it alone. I think it was, as Jerry talked about, sort of like, trying these different programs, what was going to work with us as well as work best for, the end result. And so, but I think there are other ones too. There's another, the Verity Credit Union and a bunch of credit unions came together to, where I'm out of practice. I've been retired for 5 months now, but to build a large scale building where the credit unions provided the gap funds, and oftentimes would be a government grant. Instead, the credit unions put together $11.5 million fund, and I think that project's going to hopefully break ground soon in Renton. That type of thing. But once again, it was getting the Seattle Foundation, 6 credit unions together. And I would just, shout out to Marty too. I think when I first started thinking about moving Verity into this space, he was one of the first people I talked to, and he'd throw out a bunch of different ideas, and I'd go, I don't know that's going to work. I'm not going to work. But we just kept exploring those conversations with different people, and more and more of those things are happening. Very excited about a project that Verity is a big part of down in Othello Square, where we're doing limited equity financing for apartments in one of the new buildings that's going to go in there, so that people can, they basically buy a share in this cooperative housing. They get some equity gain, but they don't have to, save up for 25 years trying to get the down payment. And so very excited about that taking off, and Verity is going to be providing that financing. So I just say, keep talking, keep asking questions, and find the right partners.
Good answer. This is another Marty question, but this one is for the YouthCare folks. How is it that you developed trust that these developers would deliver what they said and had your best interests in mind?
Well, I will start that. First of all, John and both Jerry mentioned that along the way, they needed to trust us first, because the timeline with us being able to access funding to support our ability to actually engage in this project, and then John and Jerry having to work really closely and quickly with the housing market to ensure they just weren't building a site that then they would have to kind of come up and deliver on plan B. So to help them deliver on plan A, which was partnering with YouthCare, that natural trust was built because they were willing to slow down, they were willing to listen to what our needs are, they were also willing to work with us to help make it affordable for YouthCare. And so by doing that work together, being in constant communication, and looking at the opportunities and the potential roadblocks and working through those together brought us to where we are today. So we would do this again with John and Jerry.
Yeah, I want to jump in. There's an amusing story there too. Jerry, along with another one of our church members, set up a meeting with Melinda Giovango, who was executive director of YouthCare at the time. And, so we're thinking about building this building and would you be interested? And along the way, I think Jerry dropped the name of Sue Sherbrick, who was executive director of the YWCA at that point, and so like that. And so the story goes is that Melinda got on the phone to Sue Sherbrick and said, these guys came and talked to me about building a building that they would lease to us, or however she described it. She goes, are they for real? Should I take them seriously? And Sue said, oh yeah, I would take them very seriously. So it was, there was Melinda was doing her research on her side as well.
Yep.
I only see one more question in the chat, and it is from George Kosovic. Great presentation. Can you share what the approximate total development cost per unit was?
It was about you can check me if I'm wrong, but it's about $200,000 per unit, right? It's 15 units, and the total development cost, including land purchase, all the soft costs, was about $3 million.
2.75, yeah, about 200,000 a unit.
Excellent. All right. Any other questions from our chat? I don't see anything else there. The one question that I had as you were speaking was kind of about scalability. When you spoke at the end, Degale, about the possibility of this being a real solution to homelessness, is it possible to get more partnerships like this at a scale that might make a dent in some of those needs?
Yeah, I know that we are not the only organization that's exploring these types of partnerships and opportunities in our city and county. And I think that if developers and landlords that have existing homes or sites were to come together and hear more of what the benefits are, and also what the challenges are, that we can begin to create a stock of easily accessible and affordable housing. And I know that organizations like YouthCare, we are really savvy in trying to find and access, client assistance funds to help the young people actually be in these types of housing situations. And so I think that it's really a win-win for both the developer and for the service organization. Now, I know that there are other cities and other states that have master leasing models and projects that they're focused on. And one of the things that I do know, especially in New York, is that for a lot of young people who live in those master leased units, the second step for them to moving into permanent housing is that they actually get to keep the unit, stay in that unit. And that unit then is afforded, comes off of the master lease, portfolio, and that young person is actually paying the rent on their own. So it's more market rate as opposed to, the program itself. And if you did that where you had 13 units and, you've had this relationship that you've, have all of these young people who are now able and ready to take care of their rent, you can move on to the next project. And that's the scalability. I think that is very possible here in this city.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to all of you today for sharing this really cool project and the details of how the partnership came together. Degale, John, Jerry, Jessica, really appreciate you being here today. And I hope you have a great afternoon at Housing Washington. Everyone, the next set of sessions starts at 2:10. So enjoy, and also tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Hi, thanks.
Bye.